While I was unpacking my bag, from a night at the sleep clinic, my 11-year-old granddaughter grabbed my sleeve, her eyes wide with fear. "Grandpa, promise you won't be mad. Mom and Uncle Trevor say your mind is broken. Once a doctor signs the paper, they get to decide everything for you. And when you leave, a man lets himself in at night. He has a key. 26 years hunting killers taught me never to show my hand. So I played the confused old man, faked a trip, and waited. At exactly 10 p.m. what walked through my own door made my blood run cold. Welcome to Bitter Autumn. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'd love to know where you're watching from. Share your location below. A quick note, this story contains creative elements for entertainment and educational purposes. Any similarity to actual names or locations is coincidental, but I hope you find the message deeply meaningful. It was the first Monday of November, and I had barely set my overnight bag down by the lake-facing door when my 11-year-old granddaughter told me my own family was trying to erase me. The morning had come in gray and cold, the kind of Hartwell Cove sky that presses down on the water until the lake looks like poured pewter. I was tired in the way only a night at Ashford could make me, tired wires taped to my chest, a sleep study. My daughter had signed me up for a technician half my age, telling me to relax while machines counted every skip of my heart. 26 years chasing killers across 3 counties teaches you to read a room in a heartbeat, but it doesn't teach your own heart to behave. Since Diane passed this house on Birchwood Lane had gone quiet as a held breath, and I'd learned to live inside that silence. So when Mia met me at the door instead of the television, I knew something was wrong. She'd stayed the weekend to watch the place while I was gone, an arrangement Sabrina had made the way she arranged everything now, with brisk phone calls and that patient tone people use on the elderly and the broken. Mia was small for 11 and all elbows and worried eyes, wearing one of my old flannel shirts like a robe. She didn't say good morning. She took my sleeve in her fingers and tugged, glancing back over her shoulder toward the kitchen as though the walls themselves might be listening. "Come outside, Grandpa," she whispered. "Please." I followed her onto the porch. The boards were slick with dew and the cold bit through my jacket, but I didn't rush her. You never rush a frightened witness. You let them find the words at their own speed, because the first thing they tell you is almost always the truest. She wrapped both arms around herself and stared at the lake. "Grandpa, promise you won't be mad at me." "I could never be mad at you, sweetheart. Tell me." Her chin trembled. For a moment she looked exactly like her grandmother, and something in my chest pulled tight and old. "Mom says your brain is getting broken, that a doctor's gonna prove it." The words tumbled out fast, like she'd been holding them behind her teeth for days. "She says it to Uncle Trevor, on the phone in the car. They think I'm not listening. They say you're confused now, that you won't remember stuff, that pretty soon you won't remember anything at all." I kept my face still. It's a discipline you build over decades, letting nothing show no matter what lands in front of you, so the person talking never feels the floor shift. But inside, something that had been dozing for 2 years came awake and lifted its head. Trevor. I knew the name the way you know a splinter you can't quite find. Sabrina's friend, or more than a friend. A man with a soft handshake and eyes that priced the furniture. "Confused," I repeated gently. "Is that the word she uses?" Mia nodded. "And a bunch of doctor words I didn't get. She says once the doctor writes it down, you can't say no to things anymore. That she'll get to decide for you. That she'll get to decide for you." I turned that over slowly. In plain terms, she meant guardianship, a court order, declaring a person no longer fit to manage his own affairs, handing the reins to someone else. Legally, it exists to protect people who truly can't protect themselves. But I had seen more than once across a career how a legitimate tool becomes a weapon. In the wrong hands, a signature, a diagnosis bought or bent, and suddenly a man is a prisoner in his own name. "And the white car you told me about?" I asked. She'd mentioned it once in passing weeks ago. I hadn't given it weight then. I gave it weight now. Mia's voice dropped so low I had to lean in over the railing. "It comes when you're gone. The man lets himself in, Grandpa. He has a key." The words fell like a stone dropped into flat water, and I felt the rings spread out through me long after the sound had died. He has a key. Not a broken window. Not a jimmied lock. A key. Access. Someone walking into my home in the dark, unhurried welcome by design. I said nothing for a long moment. The lake lay perfectly still, mist rising off it in thin ribbons, and a loon called once from somewhere out past the reeds. I made myself breathe evenly, made myself smile for her sake, and rested my hand on her thin shoulder. "You did the right thing telling me," I said. "You were very brave. This isn't your fault and you're not in any trouble. Not one bit. You're not confused, are you, Grandpa?" "No, sweetheart," I said. "I'm not confused." And I wasn't. That was the trouble with their whole clean little story. I remembered everything. I remembered the way Diane used to hang the spare keys by the door on a little brass hook shaped like a fish, one for the shed, one for the boathouse, one for the front. 3 keys, always 3 in the same order for 30 years. I let my eyes drift slow and casual to the hook beside the door. Something there was wrong. I felt it before I could name it, the way I used to feel a lie forming in a suspect's throat before he ever spoke. My gaze snagged on that little brass fish and held. I didn't say a word. By the time the coffee finished dripping that same morning, I had decided to play the confused old man they so badly needed me to be. It is a strange thing, deciding to become a lie. I stood at the counter in my own kitchen, the one Diane had painted the color of butter 20 years ago, and I let my shoulders round forward, the way old men's shoulders do when the world gets too heavy to hold straight. I let my hand tremble a little as I reached for the mug. Not much. Just enough. Sabrina was already at the table, my daughter, 38, and carrying the kind of tired sleep does not fix. She had driven in from the city 3 days running now, ever since the phone calls started, ever since her brother began saying the word we were all circling, but nobody would land on. Trevor sat across from her. My son-in-law. He had his phone face down beside his plate, which was a tell-all by itself, because Trevor never let that thing out of his hand, unless he wanted his hands free for something else. He was buttering toast with the patience of a man who has all the time in the world and intends to spend none of it on you. Mia, my granddaughter, sat between them, 11 years old, and stabbing at scrambled eggs she had no intention of eating. She was the only honest face at that table, and she wouldn't look at me, because children can smell a staged thing even when they can't name it. And near the pantry, half in the doorway, stood Brenda. Brenda was new. We had hired her a month after the funeral, a housekeeper, to manage what Diane used to manage without anyone noticing she managed it. She was pleasant enough, quiet, always somewhere just at the edge of the room. This morning she was wiping a counter that was already clean, and I noticed, because I had decided to start noticing everything, a small notebook tucked into her apron pocket. I carried my coffee to the table and eased down into my chair like it might break me. "You know," I said, keeping my voice light and a little lost. "Last week, I could have sworn I saw a car parked out in the yard, middle of the night, just sitting there with the lights off. I watched the table the way a man watches a river for the shape of something under the surface." Sabrina's coffee cup stopped halfway to her mouth, stopped cold. But it was her eyes that told me the truth. They filled fast, and her lips pressed together like she was holding back a sob. That was not the flinch of someone caught. That was the face of a daughter who believes her father is losing his mind and cannot bear to watch it happen. Trevor, though. Trevor answered before the silence could even settle. There wasn't any car, Dad, he said, smooth as glass, not a half second of hesitation. You've been seeing a lot of things lately. Too fast. Too clean. A man who is surprised takes a breath first. A man who has rehearsed does not. Sabrina reached across and put her hand over mine. Her fingers were shaking. You've been forgetting things, Dad. I'm scared for you, she said, and her voice cracked right down the middle of it. I looked at her and, God help me, I almost broke character, because that fear was real and it was mine to have caused. Am I, sweetheart? I said gently. Maybe I am getting old. It's not about getting old. Trevor cut in, and there it was, the steering. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, taking the wheel of the conversation like it had always been his to drive. It's about being safe. There's a specialist in Ashford, a memory expert. I already handled the paperwork. I let my eyebrows lift slowly, an old man impressed by the competence of the young. You did all that for me, Trevor. That's thoughtful. Family takes care of family, Ray. He said my name, not Dad. He'd been doing that more and more. Sabrina squeezed my hand. We just want a doctor to look at you. That's all. A memory specialist evaluates how you're thinking, your recall. It's not a punishment, it's a checkup. Please. That at least was fair and true. And I told myself to remember she meant it kindly. A cognitive evaluation is an ordinary thing, the sort of appointment a loving child arranges. In her hands, it would have been mercy. In Trevor's, it was a lever. When would this be? I asked, playing weary, playing grateful, letting my thumb rub tired circles against Sabrina's knuckles. I suppose I could find a day next month if it would put your minds at ease. Trevor didn't blink. It's already booked, Dad. Tuesday, 10:15. The kitchen went quiet in a way that had weight to it. Tuesday, 10:15. Booked. Not proposed, not offered. Decided, packaged, and set into motion before I'd have been asked a single question. They had scheduled the unspooling of my own mind, and only now were letting me hear about it. Tuesday, I repeated softly. Well, you always were organized, son. Mia's fork went still against her plate. Over by the pantry, Brenda's hand slipped into her apron, and I caught the smallest motion, a pencil, a flick of the wrist, something committed to that little notebook. Then she turned and busied herself at the sink as if she'd seen nothing at all. I lowered my eyes to my coffee, and that was when I saw it. My heart pills. The amber bottle sat on the counter where it always sat beside the toaster. But it was wrong. The cap was the wrong shade. The label sat a hair too high. It was not the bottle I had filled with my own hands the week before. I lifted my mug and drank, and I said nothing about it. Not one word. Not yet. That afternoon, alone in a house too big for one man, I stopped being a grieving widower and became a detective again. The quiet did it. 26 years. I'd worn a badge in this county, and the one thing the job teaches you is that silence has a grain to it, like wood. You learn to read which way it runs. The house had gone wrong-grained since Diane passed. Her reading chair still sat angled toward the window, the Afghan folded over the arm, the way she left it, waiting for a woman who wasn't coming back to watch the birds at the feeder. I made myself walk past it without stopping. Grief is a suspect that talks too much. I needed the room to think, so I did what I hadn't let myself do in months. I worked the scene. My study was the first stop. I keep it the way I kept my case files, everything squared to the desk edge, and that habit is exactly why I noticed. The folder marked House, Deed, and Estate was gone. Not misfiled. Gone. The manila tab that should have sat between insurance and medical had left a clean gap like a pulled tooth. I stood there, breathing slow the way you do so your hands stay steady, and I kept looking. The second thing was worse. In the top drawer sat a notarized form, a power of attorney authorization with my signature on the bottom line. Except I never signed it. I know my own hand the way I know my own limp. The R in Raymond leans. This one stood straight as a fence post. Somebody had practiced me. A power of attorney for anyone who's never had the misfortune is a document that lets one person make legal and money decisions for another. In plain terms, it hands over the keys to your whole life. And there my forged name sat calm as Sunday giving those keys away. The third thing I almost swallowed with my pills. I take a heart tablet every evening. Doctor's orders since the trouble 2 winters back, a small white oval I could find blind. I shook the bottle out into my palm and stopped. Same amber vial, same pharmacy label reading my name and the right drug. Wrong pills. These were a shade too gray, the edges too sharp, no score line down the middle. Somebody had emptied my medicine and refilled the bottle with something that only looked close enough to fool a tired old man in bad light. I set them down on this blotter and did not take one. For the first time since the funeral, my chest hurt for a reason that had nothing to do with missing my wife. Then the whole shape of it turned over in my mind, the way a card turns. The overnight sleep studies. My heart's been unreliable since the trouble 2 winters back, and this spring, Sabrina, my daughter, signed me up for overnight monitoring at a clinic in Ashford, 2 towns over. Better to stay the night wired to their machines than drive home in the dark, she said. She handled the scheduling, drove me there herself. Kind of her. Thoughtful. Except when I lined the dates up in my head, every one of those overnight stays fell on a night the house sat empty. No witness. No me. Hours of nobody home to notice a folder walk out the door, a form get signed, a bottle get swapped. The studies weren't for my heart. My heart was just the excuse. Those nights away were for the house. I let myself feel Diane's absence, then 1 clean second of it, the kind that folds your knees. I looked at her chair, and I wanted to tell her the way I'd told her about 10,000 cases across 40 years of suppers. Then I put it away. You don't investigate crying. I wiped my face with the flat of my hand and reached for the phone. My brother Colin picked up on the 3rd ring, gravel and warmth, same as always. He runs a hardware store 40 minutes north and has never once asked me a question I didn't want to answer. Colin, I need the fishing cabin for a few nights. Don't ask yet. A pause, the good kind. You in trouble, Ray. Not the kind you shoot your way out of. It's yours. Keys under the same rock. I heard him set something down, giving me his whole attention. Diane loved that porch. She did. I looked across the water in my mind to the empty cabin on the far shore where you can see my own dock through the pines. A man could sit over there with binoculars and a thermos and watch his own life get robbed. A listening post, we used to call it on the job. One more thing. If I go quiet past Sunday, you drive up. Don't call first. Just come. Sunday, he repeated, and I knew he'd carve it into himself. Ray, whatever this is, I know, thank you. I hung up before my voice could betray me and went to gather a bag, and that's when I saw it out of place on the living room coffee table, where anyone in a hurry might have set it down and forgotten. A stapled legal draft, the paper still crisp. I picked it up, expecting insurance. I read the title twice. Petition for guardianship in Raymond Kessler. Guardianship. That's the courthouse word for declaring a man unable to run his own affairs and appointing someone to run them for him over his money, his home, his medicine, his freedom. It is the legal act of being erased while you're still breathing. And the man they meant to erase was me. I turned to the last page where these petitions name the court and the judge who'll rule. I read the venue. I read the name below it, and I decided right there in Diane's quiet house exactly which face I would wear when I pretended I had never seen that name before in my life. 2 days later, I drove into Ashford and bought the 5 little machines that would either save me or bury me. The electronics shop on Marlow Street smelled of dust and warm plastic. I paid in cash, counting out bills like a man buying feed. Because a credit card leaves a trail, and I had spent a career on the job learning that trails get you killed. The clerk, a bored kid with a lanyard, never once looked at my face. Good. That was the whole point. 5 voice-activated recorders, each no bigger than a stick of gum, each capable of running for days on a single charge and storing hours of sound to a tiny memory card. I asked twice about battery life. I asked nothing about legality. That question I was saving for someone with a law degree. On the drive home, I turned the legal problem over the way I used to turn over a map before a patrol. Where my brother Colin's roof was leaking requires every person in a conversation to agree before you record it. But I do not live in Massachusetts. I live here in a one-party consent state, which means the law only asks that one participant know the recording is happening. If I am in the room or if the machine is running in my own house where I pay the mortgage, then I am that one consenting party. Still, I told myself I would call a lawyer before I ever tried to use a single second of it. Knowing a thing is legal and proving it holds up in front of a judge are two different animals, and I had already learned the hard way that assuming makes a fool of a careful man. I got back before noon and worked like I was rigging a perimeter. The living room came first. I wedged one recorder behind the row of hardback books nobody had opened since my late wife arranged them, angling it toward the couch, where confidences get whispered. The second went into my study, tucked under the lip of the desk, covering the phone and the door. The third I set in the kitchen, inside an empty coffee tin on the high shelf, because kitchens are where people forget themselves and talk. The fourth I hid in the spare sitting room we keep for guests who never quite leave the one Sabrina liked to hold her quiet phone calls in. Each placement had a logic, a field of coverage, overlapping zones, so no corner of the house could hold a secret from me. The fifth was for the porch. Sabrina is my daughter, and for the better part of a year she has run this household like a warden who smiles for the cameras. I do not trust her. I have not trusted her since the paperwork with the court's name on it, since I understood that the sweetness aimed at me was a performance staged for an audience I could not yet see. So I would give her a stage of my own, and I would let her fill it with her own voice. Brenda arrived at 1 to clean as she does twice a week. Brenda has kept these floors shining since before my knees went bad. A broad, kind woman who treats gossip like a second job, but has never once been unkind to my granddaughter. I met her on the walk with my overnight bag already slung on my shoulder, selling the story loud enough for any open window. "Off again already, Mr. Kessler," she said, propping the door with her hip. "Therapy tonight, then Colin's got a leaky roof." I answered, easy as weather. Figured I'd stay a few days and be useful for once. "I'll keep everything spotless while you're gone." "I'm sure you will, Brenda. You always do." She laughed and went inside, and I let the lie settle into the yard like it belonged there. Therapy overnight, then my daughter's house upstate. It was clean, ordinary, the kind of thing a grieving old man does. It would explain my absence, and more importantly, it would tell whoever needed telling that the house was theirs to speak freely in. Then I found Mia. She was on the back steps with a coloring book, 11 years old, and too watchful for her age the way children get when the grown-ups around them stop making sense. She is Sabrina's daughter from before my son-in-law, but she has been mine in every way that counts since the day she first fell asleep against my shoulder. I crouched down, knees complaining, and lowered my voice to something just for her. "Hey, I'm going to be away a couple nights, sweetheart. You keep your phone charged all the way up, you hear every night plugged in." "Okay, Grandpa. And you stay out of the grown-up talk. If they get to arguing, you go to your room and shut the door." I tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "If anything ever scares you, you call me. Day or night, okay?" She nodded, solemn as a soldier, and something in my chest ached for what I was about to pull her through. I saved the porch recorder for last, because the porch is where Sabrina takes her calls when she thinks the walls are too thin. I knelt by the railing, working the little machine into the gap behind the loose baluster where a spider had already claimed the corner. My hands were steady. 30 years of steady. That was when I heard the tires. Gravel crunching in the drive, 2 early hours, too early. Her car. Sabrina home when she had no reason to be. I palmed the recorder into my jacket pocket a half-second before the front door banged open. But the first thing out of her mouth wasn't for me at all. It was a fast, hushed whisper into her own, and I caught only half of it. He can't know they moved the date or the whole thing. That night, across the black water in my brother's fishing cabin, I put on headphones and listened to my family plan my disappearance. Colin's place smelled of cedar and old bait, the wood stove ticking as it cooled. I'd rode over after dark rather than drive, wanting no headlights on the county road. No reason for anyone to wonder where the old man had wandered off to. My brother didn't ask questions when I called. He just left the key under the third porch board and told me to lock up after. Now the lake sat like poured tar outside the window, and the little digital recorder, the one I'd hidden that afternoon behind the leather-bound dictionary in my study, lay on the plank table. Its files already copied to the laptop, already backed up to 2 separate cloud accounts, before I'd let myself hear a single second. I pressed play. The first voice was Trevor's. My son-in-law had a way of speaking that always sounded like he was reading terms off a screen, flat and patient, and it made my skin crawl to hear it fill my own office. "Spread Brenda's notes out, make the decline look natural," he said. Paper shuffled. Drawers I recognized by their squeak rolled open. They were searching my files, tearing through the very cabinet where I kept the deed and the accounts, certain I was 2 towns over at the eye doctor. $3,500 a month for a witness who lives in the house. Cheap. Trevor went on, and I understood then what Brenda was. Not the kind home aide my daughter had hired last spring to fix my lunches and drive me to appointments. A witness. A paid one. Somebody who slept under my roof and wrote lies about me in a spiral notebook. Then Brenda herself, warm as a church greeter. "Don't you worry, I'll add the thing with the stove, say he left a burner going all afternoon and never smelled the gas." She laughed softly, like it was a kindness. I had never once left that stove on. I knew it the way I knew my own name, and hearing her invent it gentle and sure was worse than any shouting. I gripped the edge of the table. The lake didn't move. Neither did I. Because what they were building board by false board was a guardianship, a court order that would declare me unable to manage my own affairs and hand the reins to someone else. It sounds dry legal, the sort of thing that happens to other weaker people. What it means is this: a judge signs a paper, and a grown man loses the right to spend his own money, sell his own house, choose his own doctor. To get there, they need proof of decline. Brenda's notebook was the proof. The moved court date my daughter had whispered about in the driveway was the trap sprung a week early, so I'd have no time to fight. Then came the voice I hadn't braced for. "Are we sure he's really this far gone?" Sabrina asked. "He looked fine at breakfast." "My girl," there was a crack in it, a hesitation, and I hated how much that crack meant to me. She wasn't reading from a screen like Trevor. She sounded like the child who'd been told the medicine was for her own good and was trying hard to believe it. "The doctor and the notes say he is," Trevor answered. "Trust the process." A long pause on the tape. The stove ticked in the real room in the now. "Okay," Sabrina said finally, "if it's really for his own good." And there it was. She believed them. She thought her father was slipping, thought the guardianship was a blanket to pull over a sick old man, not a noose. Trevor had my daughter convinced I was disappearing on my own, so that helping me vanish felt like love. That was the cruelest engineering of all, not Brenda's greed, not Trevor's cold arithmetic, but the way they'd turned Sabrina's tenderness into a signature on their side of the ledger. I wanted to reach into the recording and shake her. Look at the money, I wanted to say. Look at what Brenda gets paid to remember. But you can't argue with a tape. You can only listen. Brenda spoke again, softer now, promising more entries, more forgotten burners, more nights I supposedly wandered the yard in my slippers, looking for a wife, 10 months in the ground. Trevor murmured approval and told her to date a few backward to fill the gaps before the hearing. Sabrina said nothing, and her silence sat heavier than either of them. Then a third voice entered the room. It came from off to the side, low and unhurried, the voice of a person who had never once needed to raise it to be obeyed. It said only a few words, something about timelines, about not leaving loose ends, but the effect was instant. Trevor stopped mid-sentence. Brenda's chatter died. Even the drawers went still. The whole room seemed to pull its shoulders in the way people do around someone they're afraid of. I sat forward, headphones pressed hard against my ears, and played those seconds again and again, because I knew that cadence, that deliberate weighing rhythm, the pause between each phrase like a man counting cards. I'd heard it across dinner tables and hospital waiting rooms, and one very bad night 30 years ago. My mind refused to hand me the name, but my body already had it. The cold walked straight up my spine and settled at the base of my skull. There were 3 of them in that office. I'd only ever counted 2. Outside, the black water held perfectly still, giving nothing back, and I understood I'd been wrong about the size of the thing, wrong about who I was really fighting. By the time the sun came up over the cabin, I had a new problem. A 4th conspirator whose voice I almost recognized. I sat in the fishing shack, with a cheap recorder balanced on my knee, replaying the same 40 seconds until the boards under me went cold. 2 voices I already knew. Trevor quick and defensive, Sabrina sharper, always steering. But underneath them ran a 3rd register, low and unhurried, and every time it spoke, the other 2 went smaller, like kids caught passing notes when the principal walked in. That was the thing that kept me rewinding. Not what the voice said, the way the room bent around it. I'd spent 26 years reading rooms for a living, all of them behind a badge, and I knew the sound of authority that never had to raise itself. This was a man used to being obeyed, and Trevor and Sabrina obeyed him the way you obey weather. There was only one person left on earth I trusted to help me pull that voice apart, and he hadn't returned a phone call of mine in 6 years. The diner off Route 9 hadn't changed. Same cracked vinyl booths, same burnt coffee smell, same hand-lettered sign promising pie that never quite delivered. Vince Marchetti was already in the corner when I got there. Broad shoulders, hunched over a mug gray, now where he'd once been black-haired. We'd ridden together for 11 years before the department chewed him up and spat him into private work. Now he tracked cheating spouses and skip-traced deadbeats, and he did it better than anyone I'd ever met. I didn't stand. He just looked at me the way you look at a debt. "You've got some nerve," he said. "I know. Sit down before I change my mind." I slid the recorder across the sticky table like it was a loaded thing. He raised one eyebrow, then pressed the worn button. The 2 voices played. Trevor, Sabrina. And then the 3rd one slid in calm as a closing door. Vince's jaw stopped working the toothpick. "Play the calm one again," Vince said. I did. He leaned into that old bloodhound focus settling over his face, and I watched him hear exactly what I'd heard. "You hear it too," I said. "That's a man used to being obeyed." Trevor practically flinches. Sabrina never talks over him. Whoever he is, he owns both of them. Vince killed the playback and sat back, and for a long moment, he just studied me. "So, this isn't a couple of grifters skimming your accounts anymore. No. There's somebody standing behind them. Somebody with weight. I turned my coffee cup without drinking it. There's more. 2 weeks back, my spare key went missing off the ring in my kitchen. Turned up 3 days later like it had never left. Then my heart medication, the little white tablets, I refilled the bottle, and half of them were the wrong shape. Off color. I switched pharmacies and the new ones looked right. Vince went very still. Somebody swapped your pills. Somebody swapped my pills, I said, and put the key back so I'd doubt myself instead of you. He rubbed a hand down his face. When he spoke again, the gruffness had a hard floor under it. Ray, that's not a scam. Losing a key, returning it, tampering with a man's medication, and covering the trail, that's staged. That's a professional job. Somebody wanted your death to read as natural causes, a tired old cop whose heart finally quit. This is a professional setup, top to bottom. Hearing him name it out loud loosened something in my chest and tightened everything else. There's a lead, I said. My granddaughter Mia was up at the house last month. She's sharp, she notices cars. She told me a white Range Rover kept idling at the end of the road after dark, always after I'd driven off. White Range Rover. Comes at night when you're gone. Vince repeated slowly, filing it. She catch a plate. Partial. She's a good kid. I read him the letters and numbers off the back of a receipt. That's what she got. Vince pulled a battered notebook from his coat and wrote it down in his cramped, furious hand. Give me the plate. 48 hours. I've still got a friend at the DMV who owes me and another one who doesn't ask why I'm asking. I'll run the registration, then I'll turn Trevor inside out where he banks, who he calls, who signs his paychecks. That isn't you. You don't have to do this. He looked up, and the old loyalty was there under all the rust, blunt and unkillable. Whoever this is, Ray, they picked the wrong detective to bury. We finished our coffee mostly in silence, the way partners do when the words have already been said. Then we walked out into the gravel lot, where the noon light lay flat and white across the hoods of a dozen cars. Vince stopped by his truck and pulled out his phone. No sense making you wait on a callback, he muttered. Let me try the plate now. A dialed spoke low, read off Mia's partial and my address for cross-reference. Then he waited, boot-tapping eyes narrowed against the glare. I watched a semi grind past on the highway. I watched a crow pick at something near the dumpster. I watched the color drain out of Vince Marchetti's face. He said nothing into the phone. He just listened, and his hand came up slowly to grip the truck's side mirror knuckles, whitening, like a man steadying himself on a boat that had shifted underfoot. The toothpick fell from his mouth, and he didn't notice. He lowered the phone. When he finally turned to me, his eyes had gone somewhere far away and afraid. Ray, Vince said slowly, you're not going to like the name on this registration. The man scheduled to decide whether I still owned my own mind. It turned out was the same man who'd been letting himself into my house after dark. Vince set his phone face down on the sticky diner table like it might detonate. Around us, the lunch crowd clattered on forks against plates. The fry cook barking orders, a radio murmuring a ball game nobody was watching. I heard none of it. I heard only the name he wouldn't say out loud until I made him. Say it, I told him. He wiped his mouth with a paper napkin that shook in his hand. The plate on that sedan, the one parked outside your place at midnight, 3 nights running, it's registered to Curtis Vaughn. The booth tilted under me. Curtis Vaughn. I knew that name the way every man in this county knew it, stamped on courtroom doors and campaign signs. The Honorable Curtis Vaughn, presiding judge, the same black-robed authority whose signature sat waiting at the bottom of the guardianship petition my daughter's lawyer had filed against me. The petition that would strip me of the right to sign my own checks, drive my own truck, decide my own life. Declared incompetent, they wanted. Warehoused. Curtis Vaughn, I said, and the words came out flat and cold. He'd sign my life away and bang his own gavel. Vince stared at me. He'd been my partner for 11 years before the department chewed him up, and I'd never once seen the color leave his face like that. You understand what you're saying? The venue on that petition the courtroom listed for the hearing, that's his bench. His division. The judge who's supposed to weigh whether you're crazy is the same guy creeping around your porch after everyone's asleep. I did the math out loud because saying it made it real. A guardianship case is decided by a judge. Ours was assigned to Vaughn's court. And Vaughn, his honor himself, was the man in the sedan. He wasn't a bystander to the scheme to have me committed. He was the hand steering it, and he'd be the one ruling on it too. A judge deciding a case he'd personally arranged. In law, they call that a conflict of interest, the plainest kind there is. No one is allowed to be both puppet master and referee. If it ever saw daylight, it would end him. That was exactly why he'd buried it this deep. Why? Vince breathed. Why would a sitting judge risk his whole career sneaking into your house at midnight? He could have had a clerk do anything he wanted. Because he's arrogant, I said. Men like Vaughn don't trust the job to anybody else, not when it matters. He wanted to see for himself what I had, what I knew. Wanted to control it with his own two hands. I turned the salt shaker slowly on the table. He figured he only had to do it once. Just once, and no one would ever think to check. Vince leaned across the table, dropping his voice below the diner noise. Then walk into that courthouse Monday and blow it wide open. Stand up and tell them the judge is dirty, in whose courtroom Vince his. I shook my head. You don't understand how this works. If I stand in Curtis Vaughn's court and accuse Curtis Vaughn, he's the one holding the gavel. He rules on every objection. He decides what evidence comes in. He can look down from that bench and call me a paranoid man inventing conspiracies about a respected judge, and that testimony becomes Exhibit A that I've lost my mind. I let that sink in. A Judge Ray. Go at him wrong and you're the one they commit. That's what you're about to say, isn't it? He shut his mouth because that was exactly it. So we don't fight him where he's strongest, I went on. Then we don't touch his courtroom. We go over his head. Meaning what? Meaning there are 2 doors that don't open into Vaughn's building. I counted them on my fingers. One is the State Judicial Conduct Commission, the board that investigates judges themselves. They can suspend him, pull the case, refer it out. Vaughn can't gavel them down. They answer to nobody in this county. The other is the district attorney's office, the prosecutors. Breaking into a house, tampering with a court case, those are crimes, and crimes go to the DA, not to the man who committed them. I flattened my palm on the table. We build a file so tight it can't be waved away. Photos, the plate, times, dates, witnesses, and we hand it to people Vaughn can't touch. Vince exhaled slow. You're talking about taking down a man who signs commitment orders for a living. I'm talking about the only way that doesn't end with me in a padded room. I picked up his phone, my thumb hovering. You said you pulled audio off the porch camera. Play it. He hesitated, then tapped the file. Static hissed. Then a voice, low, clipped, unmistakably used to being obeyed, cut through the speaker. We move before he finds out about... The recording died. Just clicked off mid-sentence like a door slamming. I played it again. And again. Before he finds out about what the words hung in the greasy air between us, unfinished, and I felt them hook into something deep in my chest and refused to let go. What's a judge doing sneaking into your house at midnight? Vince asked, and this time it wasn't fear in his voice. It was hunger. I stood through a 10 on the table and headed for my truck with the phone still in my fist. That Vince is the question that ends him. I climbed into the cab, shut the door, and sat gripping the wheel in the parking lot heat. Vaughn had left one sentence hanging over me like a wire pulled taut. Before he finds out about what? I didn't start the engine. I just sat there already pulling at that thread, and I knew bone deep that I would not stop until the whole thing unraveled in my hands. You don't win a war like this with anger. You win it with a lawyer, an accountant, and a lab report, so that's exactly who I called that week. The next morning, before the coffee had even cooled, I drove into Ashford and parked outside a squat brick building with frosted glass and a brass nameplate. Adrienne Blackwood was an estate litigator, the kind of attorney who reads a will the way a surgeon reads an X-ray, and she'd agreed to see me on the strength of a single phone call. Her office smelled like old paper and stronger coffee than mine. She listened to the recording I'd made, the one from the parking lot, the one where Vaughn's warning still rang in my ears, and when it finished, she folded her hands. "Good news and hard news," she said. "We're in a one-party consent state, which means you were legally allowed to record a conversation you took part in. Nobody's going to jail for that tape." She let the relief settle before she took it away. "The hard news is that a recording tells a courtroom what someone said, not what someone did. Judges want independent proof. The tapes point the way, but I need toxicology and the money trail for court." I leaned forward. "Then walk me through how they're stealing it. Legally, I mean. Make it plain." Adrienne pulled a legal pad toward her and drew 2 boxes. "Guardianship. Right now you're being painted as incapacitated, confused, forgetful, unable to manage your own affairs. Sabrina files a petition asking the court to name her your legal guardian. If a judge signs it, she controls your medical decisions, your housing, and critically, your checkbook. Once she's guardian, Trevor doesn't have to break in through a window. He walks through the front door she holds open and drains the trust as her so-called financial helper. Every withdrawal looks like caretaking on paper. And a judge just allows that. A careful judge wouldn't." Her pen stopped. "But you told me a judge may already be involved. If that's true, understand the chain of command. We don't argue our case in front of a compromised bench and hope for mercy. If a sitting judge is in this, we go to the Judicial Conduct Commission, not his bench." She said it flatly, the way you'd explain which wire not to cut. "That's the oversight board that disciplines judges. We root around the problem instead of begging it for fairness." The strategy took shape in front of me like a house being framed. Anger had been my only tool for weeks. Now I had blueprints. Before I left, Adrienne told me the single most useful thing I did that whole month. "Your heart medication. You told me you got worse after Sabrina started managing your pills. Don't guess. Get a sample and get it tested." She wrote a name on a card, an independent toxicology lab, 2 towns over one with no ties to the family or the local hospital. Chain of custody matters. Seal it, sign it, and let them log it. If somebody's poisoning you, a lab report is a witness that can't be intimidated. I drove home while Sabrina was out, and I took 3 of the amber pills from my own weekly organizer, sealed them in a bag, and drove them to the lab myself. The technician logged the time, the date, my name. It felt like planting a flag. The next stop was the bank and the next soldier in my army. Lorraine Petrakis was a fee-only financial advisor, meaning she earned a flat rate and pocketed no commissions, so her only loyalty was to my money staying my money. She'd already pulled the trust statements I'd authorized. Her expression told me plenty before she opened her mouth. "Move the trust before they can freeze it," Lorraine said. "The liquid assets, the cash, the CDs, the brokerage funds, I can shift into a protected account today, one that requires 2 signatures for any withdrawal. Yours and the trustees. Once guardianship paperwork hits, they can petition to lock everything down. We move first, and we document why." "How much have they already drained?" She turned the laptop toward me. Rows of transfers, each one stamped as a loan. "Enough that Trevor's spending money he doesn't legally have yet. These aren't gifts, and they aren't salary. Somebody labeled them loans against the estate, which means Trevor is borrowing against an inheritance that only exists if you die. I'm flagging every one of these prior withdrawals as a disputed loan with dates and amounts, so no one can later claim they were approved. 2.4 million in the trust. A house worth 1.6. Nearly $4 million, all of it circling a drain that Trevor and Sabrina had quietly unscrewed. Lorraine marked each questionable transfer in red and printed me a copy for Adrienne. Everything logged. Everything witnessed. Nothing left to memory or shouting. For 4 days I built. Lawyer, accountant, laboratory, 3 fronts, 1 war. I slept better than I had in weeks, not because I was calm, but because I finally had a plan with edges I could hold. Then late Thursday, my phone buzzed with the lab's number. The technician didn't waste words. Your heart medication came back adulterated. The pills contained the correct cardiac compound, yes, but also a sedative. A benzodiazepine in a dose that would cause confusion, memory loss, and disorientation in an older adult. Confusion. Memory loss. Exactly the symptoms that make a man look incompetent to a judge. They weren't just stealing his money. They were manufacturing the confusion they'd used to steal it. I picked up the printed results from the pharmacy counter. My hands steady in a way that surprised me and pushed out into the daylight. That's when I stopped cold. Across the lot, standing dead center between the parked cars, was Brenda, the housekeeper they'd planted in my home, and she was looking straight at me. The secret to being underestimated is to keep proving them right at exactly the wrong moments, and that evening I proved it beautifully. Brenda had followed me home. Not openly, of course. She'd trailed my sedan the whole way from the pharmacy, keeping a polite 2-car lengths back then, parked across the street, and lingered by her car as though checking her bag. Brenda had worked in this house for months, and lately she'd appointed herself a kind of watchtower for my son-in-law. Whatever Trevor was paying her in cash and flattery, she was earning it. So I gave her a show. I fumbled the house key against the lock 3 times. Muttered at the doorknob like it had insulted me and dropped the whole ring into the flower bed. When I bent to retrieve it, I let my knees wobble, let my hand paw the mulch a beat too long. Right on cue, her sensible shoes came clicking up the walk. "You all right, Mr. Kessler? You look lost." I straightened slowly, blinking at her, like the sun had personally betrayed me. "Just, where did I leave my glasses, Brenda?" She reached up, gentle as a nurse, and tapped the frames sitting square on my forehead. "On your head, sir." Her shoulders dropped a full inch, and she exhaled a long breath she'd clearly been holding since the parking lot. Relief. Pure, uncomplicated relief. In that instant, I stopped being a threat to her and became a chore, again a confused old man who couldn't find eyewear parked on his own skull. "Would you look at that?" I said, and let out a soft, embarrassed laugh. "Getting to be a real problem, isn't it? Happens to everyone." She lied kindly and patted my arm before retreating. She'd report back that this old man was fine. Fading, harmless, handled. Exactly what they needed to believe. Inside, I set the pharmacy envelope on the counter without opening it. My hands weren't the ones shaking anymore. Those printed results, proof that the pills Trevor's aide had been slipping into my evening routine, were sedatives, not the heart medication. On the label, I folded them small and tucked them behind the loose baseboard in the pantry where I'd been building a quiet little archive of everything. That's when I heard him. Trevor's voice carried from the den low and clipped the way it got when he thought no one worth counting was listening. I eased along the hallway, sock feet silent on the hardwood, and stopped just short of the doorway. "I said you'll get it," he was saying. The old man's handled. A pause. Whoever was on the other end pushed back. "Don't lecture me about the timeline. It's covered. Everything's covered before the 15th. His voice cracked on the date, a hairline fracture beneath the bravado. You'll have the full amount before the 15th, all of it. I'm not asking for more time. I'm telling you it's done. I stood there in the dim hall and felt the whole shape of it rearrange in my head. For weeks, I'd read Trevor's pushiness as greed, as a son-in-law impatient for an inheritance he didn't want to wait for. I'd had it wrong. This wasn't patience running thin. This was panic wearing a nice shirt. A hard deadline. A sum that had to be paid, not wanted paid, before the 15th of the month, or something worse than disappointment came collecting. Trevor wasn't robbing me because he was cruel. He was robbing me because he was cornered. That made him far more dangerous and far more careless. I retreated before the call ended, back to my armchair, glasses lowered onto my nose, a crossword open to the same clue I'd been stuck on for 2 days. A small hand tugged my sleeve. Mia had come in through the back quiet as a cat, her school backpack still on. She was 11 with her mother's serious eyes, and she had a child's radar for when the grown-ups around them were pretending. She climbed halfway into my lap and pressed a folded sheet of construction paper into my hands. "I made you a drawing, Grandpa," she whispered, glancing toward the den. "Look on the back." On the front was the three of us stick figures under a yellow scribble of sun, holding hands, a lopsided house behind us. I made the appropriate sounds of delight, loud enough for the room. Then, under the cover of turning it to admire the light, I read the back. There, in the careful, pressed, hard strokes of a purple crayon, my granddaughter had written a sentence that stopped my breath. The white car man came again. The white car man. A stranger she'd seen twice now, parked at the curb, talking to her father. A man I had never met, and Trevor had never mentioned. A man whose visits lined up, I realized, with a cold certainty, with the exact days the mood in this house had turned sharp and hurried. "Thank you, sweetheart." I managed and kissed the top of her head so she wouldn't see my face. "It's the best one yet." She beamed and slid off to find her mother, unaware she'd just handed me the missing edge of the whole puzzle. I sat with that crayon sentence long after the house went dark, turning it over the way you test a tooth that started to ache. Trevor. A deadline. A creditor at the curb in a white car. A son who was drowning and had decided somewhere along the way that his father was the anchor he'd trade for air. Near midnight, my phone lit the ceiling. Vince, the one man from my old life I still trusted, the private investigator I'd quietly hired the day this all began. His message was short, and it made the room feel colder than it was. My daughter believed she'd married a businessman. That night, Vince showed me she'd married a rehearsal. I drove out to the fishing shack past midnight, the one place I still felt like the man I used to be. The lake sat flat and black under a moon that gave nothing away. Vince was already there, hunched at the little table where I used to gut bluegill, a manila folder squared in front of him, like evidence he wished he didn't have to present. He'd been my partner for 11 years on the force, and my go-to investigator ever since, a man who could find the truth without leaving fingerprints on it. He didn't smile when I came in. That told me plenty before either of us said a word. "Sit," he said. "You'll want to be sitting." I sat. He slid the first pages across the warped wood bank statements. Credit lines, a spider's web of numbers highlighted in yellow. Trevor Cole, the son-in-law, who wore tailored jackets and talked about quarterly growth, at every family dinner was a house of cards in a stiff wind. "He's broke Ray, drowning in it," Vince said. "Every account is a shell hiding another empty account. He's got 3 limited liability companies registered in his name, LLCs, paper businesses, with no employees, no real revenue. They exist to move money around and make it look like income. Underneath the costumes, there's nothing. He owes more than he'll earn in a lifetime." I stared at the figures until they blurred. I'd spent my career reading men who lied for a living, and still I'd let this one carry my grandchildren on his shoulders. A cold, professional dread settled into me, the kind you feel when you realize the threat was never at the gate. It was already inside the house, eating at the table. Then the trust isn't greed, I said slowly. It's a lifeboat. Diane's estate isn't a prize to him. It's the only thing keeping him from going under. That's where it gets worse. Vince pulled out a second stack. Photographs, this time grainy long-lens surveillance shots stamped with dates. Trevor at a highway gas station. Trevor pulling out of our neighborhood at dawn. Trevor on an interstate heading east. He makes the same drive regular as a paycheck. A city 3 hours from here. Every couple of weeks, sometimes more. He tells Sabrina it's client work. There are no clients, Ray. I checked every name he's ever given her. Ghosts. 3 hours east. I turned the phrase over, hunting for the honest version of it, and finding none. A man doesn't burn that many miles that many times for nothing. He's feeding something. How long, I asked. How long has this been running? Vince didn't answer right away. He arranged the papers the way a surgeon lays out instruments, deliberate, buying himself a breath. Then he looked up at me with something close to pity. He married Sabrina 4 years back, before your wife passed, before there was any money to grab. He let that land. Diane was still with us. The estate didn't exist yet. There was nothing to inherit, nothing to scheme after. He walked into this family when we were just a family. The shack seemed to tilt. 4 years. I did the arithmetic even though I already knew the answer, because part of me needed to catch him in a mistake. Diane had been alive at the wedding. I'd watched her cry in the front pew, watched her press a handkerchief to her mouth when Sabrina said her vows. Back then, we were comfortable, not wealthy. The real money, the trust, the land sale, all of it came after we lost her. So he wanted in long before the estate existed. I said, my voice sounding far away, like it belonged to someone standing outside in the dark. Why a man doesn't marry into a family with no fortune and then wait years for one to appear. That's not opportunism. That's patience. That's a plan. That's the part you need to see for yourself. He didn't hand me the next page. He turned it and pushed it slowly across the table with 2 fingers, the way you'd nudge something you didn't want to touch. It was a court filing, an old one from a county I didn't recognize. A name change petition. And there in the box, marked former legal name, was a surname I hadn't heard spoken aloud in almost 30 years. Merrick. The word went through me like a nail. My hand tightened on the paper without my telling it to. I knew that name the way you know. A scar you stopped looking at Merrick belonged to a chapter of my old life. I'd worked hard to bury a debt of a very different kind. A man I'd crossed back when crossing men had consequences. Trevor Cole was a costume. Underneath it was a Merrick. You recognize it, Vince said. It wasn't a question. He'd watched my face do the thing faces do when the past reaches up through the floorboards and grabs an ankle. I managed. God help me, I might. He waited, letting me steady myself, then reached for one last photograph at the bottom of the folder. He held it a moment, as if giving me the chance to say I'd seen enough. I hadn't said it. I never would have. He set it down in the pool of lamplight and slid it toward me. Trevor was laughing in the picture, genuinely warmly, in a way he never laughed in our house. Beside him stood a woman with her arm looped through his, like she'd earned the right to it, and pressed against their legs were 2 children, small, grinning up at him, as though he hung the moon. A whole life. A second family 3 hours east, breathing and real and happy, and my daughter had no idea it existed. 3 hours away, at the very hour, I sat staring at that photo my son-in-law was tucking in, children my daughter didn't know existed. I could almost see it, the small lamp. The story read aloud, the goodnight kiss, pressed to two foreheads that carried half his blood. I set the photograph face down on the kitchen table because I could not bear the warmth in his eyes, a warmth he had never once spent on Sabrina. My phone buzzed. Vince. He was an old friend, a retired investigator I'd hired the week my gut first turned sour, the only man I still trusted to dig without flinching. I answered before the second ring. "Tell me I'm wrong," I said. "Tell me that picture means nothing. I wish I could." Papers shuffled on his end, dry and deliberate. "I've been at the county records office and 2 courthouses since Dawn Ray. It's worse than a mistress. There's a marriage license, a legal one filed and stamped under a name that's his, but bent just enough to slip past a clerk. Same man, different spelling, different social security paperwork. He's got a whole documented life over there." The floor seemed to tilt beneath my chair. A marriage, an actual binding marriage. Binding, which means the one he signed with your daughter isn't. Vince exhaled, and I heard 30 years of hard cases in it. He's a bigamist and a professional groom. This isn't a man who fell in love twice. This is a man who marries for a living. I gripped the edge of the table until my knuckles ached. A living. Before that woman in the photo, there was another. A widow out past the state line. Comfortable savings, a paid-off house, no children to ask questions. She died 18 months into the marriage. Nothing anyone could prove, but the timing stinks, and he walked away with the estate. He filed as the grieving husband. Collected. Vanished. Reappeared as somebody new. He paused. For the audience's sake, understand what that means legally. Marrying one person, while already lawfully married to another, is bigamy, a crime, and it makes the second marriage void from the start. Inheriting under a false identity is fraud on top of it. He isn't bending rules, he's breaking laws that carry prison time. My mouth had gone to sand. There was only one question left that mattered, and I forced it out. "Does Sabrina know any of it?" The silence stretched long enough that I nearly asked again. "Everything says no. She's a Mark Ray, same as the last woman." His voice softened, which frightened me more than the facts. "I pulled her texts, her spending, the way she talks about him to her friends. She's not hiding a scheme. She's defending a man she thinks hung the stars. He's fed her a story about a cruel father and a cold family, and she's swallowed every word. She isn't the trap. She's the bait he doesn't even have to pay." Something enormous shifted inside my chest, a slow, grinding correction of the world. For weeks, I had let myself hate her a little, my own girl, for choosing him over me, for the frost in her voice, for the birthdays she skipped. I had built her into an accomplice because it hurt less than admitting I'd failed to protect her. Now that fortress crumbled, and what stood beneath it was worse and truer. "Then she isn't my enemy," I said quietly. "She's his victim." "Careful," Vince said. "A scared victim can still testify against you. If you go charging in there like an avenging father, she won't hear a rescue. She'll hear an attack on the love of her life. She'll close ranks around him, and every word you say will come back at you in his mouth." Fear doesn't make people run to safety, Ray. It makes them run to whoever's holding them. I closed my eyes, and against the dark, I saw her at 6 years old, wobbling down our cracked driveway on a purple bicycle with white streamers screaming my name. Not in terror, but in triumph, as I let go of the seat, and she rode free for the first time. She had turned to find me cheeks pink, absolutely certain I would always be right there behind her. I had promised her that without words, the way fathers do. I let the memory bloom for one aching breath. Then I locked it away, because a man cannot plan a war while his heart is standing in a driveway 25 years gone, so I don't tear him away from her. I said, thinking aloud, steadier now. I show her the door herself. I let her walk out on her own legs. Now you're using your head. She can come back from this. The words felt like a vow. If she understands she was hunted, not stupid, if she understands nobody blames her, she can come back. She's not lost Vince. She's just surrounded. I can reach her. I only have to live long enough to do it. Because that was the other thing sitting unspoken between us. A man who had already buried one wife for money would not hesitate to bury an old man asking dangerous questions. There's more, Vince said, and paper rustled again, slower now. In the pile he built for the widow scam, the aliases, the fake references, the sealed adoption records. He used to fabricate his history. There's a family name that keeps surfacing underneath all of it. His real people. And Ray, he hesitated in a way he never did. I think you should sit down before I read it to you. He said the name. The kitchen went silent as a held breath. Because I had read that name before, not in gossip, not in some stranger's file, but in a case of my own. A file I had signed, sealed, and closed nearly 30 years ago, believing I'd buried it for good. The next morning, grief finally made me open the one drawer I'd sworn I'd get to someday, my late wife's. 10 months. That's how long Diane had been gone, and how long her side of our bedroom had stayed a museum nobody was allowed to disturb. Her reading glasses still rested on the nightstand, folded the way she left them. Her cardigan still hung over the chair, holding the faint shape of shoulders I would never touch again. I had told myself I was preserving her. The truth was uglier and simpler. I was afraid that emptying her things would make the loss official, would turn gone for now into gone forever. But after last night, after Trevor said that name in my kitchen, and the whole room stopped breathing, I couldn't afford sentiment. If my late wife had left behind anything a man like my son-in-law could weaponize in the fight over her estate, I needed to find it before he did. I started with the closet, then the vanity, moving with the careful dread of a man diffusing something he built himself. Her handwriting was everywhere, grocery lists, birthday reminders, little notes to herself in the margins of paperbacks. Each one landed like a soft punch. I kept my jaw tight and my eyes dry. Diane hated a spectacle. She would have rolled her eyes at me sniffling over a coupon. The bottom drawer of her dresser was locked. I'd forgotten it even had a lock. 31 years of marriage, and I had never once seen her open it. I found the small brass key taped beneath the jewelry box, exactly where a private woman would hide something she trusted no one to look for. My hands were steadier than they had any right to be. Inside were letters. Dozens of them bundled with rubber bands gone brittle with age, the paper yellowed at the edges. And beneath the bundles, flat against the wood, a single envelope stamped with the return address of a hospital across the state. A place I knew Diane had no reason to visit, sealed and hidden for what the postmark told me had been decades. I sat on the edge of our bed and read enough to understand that my wife had carried something for the entire length of our life together and had never once set it down for me to help her hold it. The papers didn't spell it out. They circled it the way careful people circle a wound. Dates. A county I didn't recognize. A form with half its blanks left deliberately empty. Whatever Diane knew, she had known it silently, smiling across the dinner table, packing my lunches, growing old beside me, and choosing every single day not to tell me. I picked up the phone before I could talk myself out of it, and called Adrienne Blackwood, the estate attorney, who had guided our family through the will and the endless paperwork of death. She was sharp, unsentimental, and the only person I trusted to answer a question without asking why my voice was shaking. Adrienne, hypothetically, another heir surfaces. What happens? There was a pause, the sound of a professional recalculating. The entire distribution reopens, she said. A previously unknown heir, a biological child, say, would have a legal claim to a share of the estate. Every allocation we've drafted gets unwound and redone from scratch. Why do you ask? I looked at the envelope in my lap. I think Diane kept something from me. Ray. Her tone shifted, careful now. If there's another child out there, one who can prove a claim, then that inheritance doesn't just get divided differently. It gets divided smaller for everyone currently at the table. You understand what that means. Tell me anyway. It means motive. If someone in that room already knew and wanted the shares to stay exactly as they are, Ray, if there's another child, that's motive for everyone at that table. I closed my eyes. The kitchen came back to me, Trevor's face, the name dropping into the silence, my own blood running cold. Because I'd signed that name onto a sealed file nearly 30 years ago and buried it, certain it would stay buried. That's exactly what I'm afraid of, I said. Adrienne told me to touch nothing, to photograph everything, to call her before I spoke to another living soul. I promised her things I already knew I might break. Then I hung up and sat in the quiet of the room where Diane had slept beside me for 3 decades, and I let myself feel just for a moment how completely alone a marriage can leave you when it ends with a secret still locked in a drawer. I had known this woman. I would have sworn it on anything sacred. I knew how she took her coffee and which songs made her cry, and the exact weight of her hand finding mine in the dark. And yet a whole chapter of her had lived in this room, sealed away, waiting for the one morning I finally worked up the nerve to look. I lifted the last bundle. Beneath it lay a single sheet, folded once the ink faded, but the handwriting unmistakable. The same loops and slants that had signed 30 years of anniversary cards. The same hand that wrote my name inside every book she ever gave me. It was addressed to someone I had never heard of. Not a friend, not a relative, not anyone from the long roll call of our shared life. A stranger's name in my wife's careful hand. My thumb smoothed the crease open, and the first line stopped my heart cold, the way that name in my kitchen had stopped the whole room the night before. It began, "To the daughter I never let your father meet." I had spent a career uncovering other people's secrets. It took my dead wife's handwriting that afternoon to hand me my own. The letter lay across my knees like a live wire, and the study around me went unnaturally quiet. Diane's script was unmistakable. Those looping capitals, the way she crossed her sevens, the European way she'd picked up in college. Grief had a fresh weight, now heavier than the day I buried her, because the woman I mourned had been keeping a room inside our marriage I was never allowed to enter. I read it twice before the words stopped swimming. Before. Diane before the wedding. In that little chapel outside Sacramento, there had been someone else. A woman named Carol Ames, a summer I'd nearly forgotten, a goodbye I'd assumed was clean. It had not been clean. Carol had been carrying my child when she left, and she had chosen silence. No phone call, no certified envelope, nothing. She'd raised the girl alone and never told me her name. Rachel Ames, 34 years old now. I did the arithmetic 3 times, as if the math might blink and correct itself. A daughter who had learned to walk, to read, to drive, to grieve, a mother, while I chased strangers' scandals across county courthouses and told myself I had no regrets. Somewhere out there, a woman shared my eyes and my stubborn jaw, and I had missed every single day of her. The cruelest part came in the final paragraph. Diane had discovered the truth not at the beginning, but years into our marriage. She'd stumbled onto Carol's old correspondence and pieced it together. And instead of coming to me, she had buried it. "To protect what we built," she wrote. "To keep our family whole." She had decided unilaterally that a living daughter was a threat to be managed rather than a person I deserved to know. The betrayal I'd spent a sleepless night imagining had flipped inside out. I had not strayed. I had not abandoned anyone. A whole life had simply been lifted out of my hands quietly by the two people I'd trusted to tell me everything. My phone was already buzzing against the desk. Vince. Of course it was Vince, my old partner from the force, now a private investigator. The only man who returned my calls at odd hours without complaint. "Talk to me," he said. "You sound like you've seen a ghost." "I have a daughter, Vince. 34 years, and I never knew." The sentence came out flat because my chest couldn't manage anything more. There was a long pause, the kind Vince rarely allowed himself. "My God. Does anyone else know she exists?" Diane knew. My voice cracked on her name. Diane hid her. I heard him exhale, slow and careful, the sound a man makes when he's recalculating everything he thought he understood. I told him the rest in pieces: Carol, the summer, the letter, the name. Rachel Ames. He wrote it down. I could hear the scratch of his pen through the line. Then, for the first time, my old instincts stirred beneath the shock. I was a detective before I was anything else, and a detective's mind cannot help but assemble a timeline. If Rachel existed, then Rachel was blood. And blood, in the language of the lawyers circling Diane's estate, meant something specific and enormous. "Vince, listen to me. If she's my biological child, she's a legal heir. Do you understand what that does?" I was already pulling the estate documents from the drawer, the ones the attorneys had insisted were airtight. An heir means the inheritance doesn't pass the way they've drawn it up. A direct descendant has a claim, the courts protect it. Doesn't matter that I never met her, doesn't matter that no one told me. Her existence splits everything. It rewrites who gets what. That's why they're moving so fast, Vince said, slowly catching up to me. Then his tone hardened. "Because I've got something you need to hear. Somebody ran a search on that same name last month, Ray. I've already traced where she lives." The room tilted. "Say that again." "A record search. Rachel Ames, 34, matching profile. Someone was looking before you ever opened that letter. Whoever it is, they were fast, and they were quiet, and they had access to databases most people can't touch." He let that land. I backtracked the query. "She's up in Oregon. Small town outside Bend. I can have an address to you within the hour." I sat down hard. The pieces I'd been shoving around for 2 weeks suddenly locked into a single, terrible shape. "Then they know she splits everything," I said. "That's why they're rushing." Because here was the thing I hadn't been able to name until now. The frantic timeline. The pressure to close the estate before probate could breathe. And that half sentence I'd overheard, the one that had haunted me: Vaughn, pale and sweating, muttering to someone in the corridor, "Before he finds out about," and then swallowing the rest like it burned. "Before he finds out about Rachel." That was the sentence's missing end. Not a scandal of mine. A daughter. My daughter. The living, breathing complication that could collapse whatever fortune the other side was scrambling to secure before the ink dried. "Vince," I said, quieter now, "get me that address, but do it carefully. If someone else found her first, she may be in more danger than she knows. On it. And Ray, a beat. Whatever this is, it's bigger than one inheritance. People don't run silent searches over a normal probate fight." I was right, and the wrongness of it settled into my bones like cold water. Because a question had begun to form, sharper than the grief, sharper even than the shock of fatherhood arriving 3 decades late. Why would a sitting judge care about a lost daughter of mine? There was no clean answer. But I felt it the way I'd always felt a story, before I could prove it, that the truth I was chasing lived in a file older than my marriage, older than Rachel, older than the lie Diane had chosen to protect. The most important witness of my 26-year career was 11 years old, and that afternoon on a park bench she was terrified she'd done something wrong. Mia sat with her knees pulled up, her tablet clutched against her chest, like a shield, watching the ducks scatter across the pond, as if they might carry off whatever secret she was holding. I lowered myself beside her slowly, the way you approach a deer at the edge of a clearing, and I waited. For 30 years, I'd made my living, getting frightened people to talk. I knew the rhythm of it, the patience it demanded, the way silence could be gentler than any question. So I said nothing about the case, nothing about the judge, nothing about the file older than my marriage that had kept me awake for a week. I just handed her the paper sack of stale bread I'd brought, and we fed the ducks until her shoulders came down from around her ears. "Grandpa," she finally said so quietly, the word almost drowned in the wind. "I have to show you something, but I think I'm going to be in trouble." "Am I in trouble, Grandpa?" she asked again, louder, her thumb hovering over the screen. "No, sweetheart." I kept my voice as level as the water. "You might have just saved my life." She blinked at me, uncertain whether I was teasing. I wasn't, and something in my face must have told her so. She explained it in a rush, the way children confess to breaking a lamp. She filmed everything she said. Birthdays, the dog, the rain on the window, her own reflection making faces. It was just what she did. And a few months ago at her mother's house, she'd left the tablet propped on the bookshelf, still recording Forgotten, while she went to find her shoes. "I didn't understand what they were saying," she whispered, "but it made my stomach feel bad. So I hid it. I never deleted it." "You weren't meant to." I put my hand over hers, stilling the trembling thumb. "But you kept it, and that was brave." She pressed play. The audio was thin, distant, the camera aimed at a row of paperbacks, but the two voices came through with terrible clarity. The first I recognized at once. Trevor, my son-in-law, the man who smiled at Thanksgiving and called me by my first name. The second belonged to a man I had spent a lifetime learning to fear from a distance. Vaughn. "We bury Kessler quietly," Trevor was saying. "No headlines. He's old, he's tired, people already think he's chasing ghosts. Then we finish it," Vaughn answered, and his voice had the smoothness of a blade wiped clean. "We end the thing that should have been finished years ago, before he digs where he shouldn't." I felt my pulse in my throat. For clarity's sake, let me be plain about what I was hearing. Two men, one of them family, discussing how to destroy a retired detective, me, before I could dig up what I'd started to suspect. That alone was enough to bring to the police. But it was the next sentence that turned the ground to water beneath me. "He won't stop," Vaughn said. "But after what Kessler did back then, he doesn't get to keep a thing." The recording ended. A duck complained somewhere near the reeds. Mia searched my face, waiting to learn whether she was ruined or forgiven. "You did everything right," I told her, and I made myself smile because an 11-year-old should not carry the weight of grown men's sins. "You were braver than most people I've ever met. Now this is my job, understand? You gave it to me and I'll carry it from here." She nodded, and slowly, like a fist unclenching, she let herself lean against my arm. We watched the sun slide low and gold across the pond, one small warm minute, stolen from the dark closing in around us. I would not let her feel it. That was the one thing I could still promise. I drove her home. I hugged Trevor at his own front door with a steadiness that surprised me, because a man who has interviewed murderers learns to keep his hands from shaking. Then I went back to the house, poured coffee I wouldn't drink, and sat with the phone until the numbers stopped swimming. After what Kessler did back then. My name. My past. A door I had welded shut 3 decades ago, and these men held the key. But I did not call a lawyer first. I did not call the police. I called the number I'd copied from that old file, the one that had started all of it, The daughter I had never known existed until a week ago. Rachel. 34 years old, born after the worst year of my life, hidden from me by a lie Diane had chosen to protect. She answered on the fourth ring, wary, her voice careful. In that way, people learn when they've been disappointed enough times. "Why call me now?" she said. "After 34 years, I could have lied. I had 100 strategies, a reporter's instinct for the useful angle, and every one of them told me to ease her in gently, to hold back the ugliness until she trusted me. Instead, I chose the harder thing. Because I only just learned you exist," I said. "Diane never told me. I found your name in a file I wasn't supposed to see, and I have spent 7 days deciding whether I had the right to disturb your life. You deserved the truth first before anyone hands you a version shaped to their needs, even mine." The line went quiet. Not a dead quiet, a listening one. "You're not what I expected," she said at last. "Neither are you," I answered. "But I think before this is over, we're going to need each other." And in that fragile silence, I understood that everything now turned on what Kessler had done back then, the sentence that flung wide a door I had bolted shut for 30 years. That night, I hauled a box of old case files into the cabin, the one box every cop keeps and prays he never has to open. Mine had just married into my family. I set it on the fishing shack's warped table beside the lantern, beside the coffee I wouldn't drink. Outside, the lake slapped the pilings in that slow, patient way water has, like it has all the time in the world to wear a man down. That taped sentence still rang in my skull, and it had unbolted a door I'd leaned my whole life against. The cardboard flaps were soft with age. I already knew what waited inside. Some men bury their sins in the ground. Cops bury them in evidence rooms and archive shelves in the neat official language of a closed case. I pulled the top folder free, and the year stamped in the corner looked back at me like an accusation. 1993. I was young then. Hungry. The kind of hungry that makes a detective see the picture he wants before the picture is finished. There had been a killing in a rail yard town north of here. A man beaten and left in the weeds, and the county wanted somebody in a cell before the newspapers turned it into a season. I gave them somebody. I built a case out of a borrowed jacket, a witness who wasn't sure, and a confession that came after 11 hours in a room with no clock. It held. It held because I made it hold, and later, months later, when the noise died and the medals were handed out, I started to doubt. A different name surfaced in a different report, a detail that didn't fit the man I'd caged. I remember sitting with that doubt like a stone in my chest. I remember exactly what I did with it. Nothing. I told myself the jury had spoken. I told myself a reopened case would sink my career before it began. I was afraid, and I was ambitious, and those two things braided together into a silence I wore like a good suit for 30 years. The man I'd helped convict never walked free again. He died behind those walls, coughing his last in an infirmary, while I was 3 promotions into the life his conviction bought me. My hands were shaking now. I reached for the phone and dialed the only man still awake who owed me nothing and answered anyway. Vince still kept friends inside the department's records division, and after a lifetime chasing paper, he could pull any file ever logged and never asked why you wanted it. He picked up on the second ring, his voice thick with sleep. "Pull the cold case, Vince. 1993. I heard him sit up, heard the creak of a chair 100 miles away. Cole, as in Edward Cole, the name landed like a fist. Edward Cole. The man I'd put away the name splashed across every front page that autumn, the case that made my career. Cole. The same 4 letters I'd been trying not to think about since I'd heard them spoken aloud tonight. "That's the one," I said. My throat had gone to sand. Tell me who prosecuted it. Keys clicked. A long pause, the kind that stretches until you can hear your own pulse. Then Vince quieter, now like a man reading something he didn't like the shape of. Curtis Vaughn, first chair. I closed my eyes. Curtis Vaughn, a lean, sharp-suited assistant district attorney back then, all ambition and jawline, the youngest first chair the county had ever fielded. He'd taken my thin case and sold it to 12 jurors like it was gospel. That conviction launched him. He wrote it to the district attorney's office, then a judgeship, then the kind of quiet power that gets streets named after you. He and I had built the same lie from opposite ends of the same courtroom, and we'd both grown fat on it. Then none of this was ever about money, I said, because that was the thread, wasn't it? All of it, the threats, the dead man on the pier, Kessler crawling out of the dark, the reason a stranger had come hunting men my age with my history, none of it was greed. It was reckoning. Somebody was working backward, through an old ugly arithmetic, collecting on a debt 2 men had refused to pay. The prosecutor and the detective. Vaughn and me. Our names weren't on a ledger. They were on a list. Ray. Vince's voice was careful. What's this about? I didn't answer him. I was staring at the name on the conviction sheet, the man we'd broken and buried, the one whose innocence I'd swallowed to save my own skin. I said it out loud finally after 30 years of refusing to. I said it like a confession in an empty church. Edward Cole, not Trevor. Trevor is the son. Edward was the father. The man I'd sent to die for a murder. He never committed. That was the cruelty of it. The detail I'd let myself forget. I hadn't just caged an innocent man. I'd taken a father from his boy, then locked the door and walked away whistling. The lantern hissed. The lake kept slapping the pilings. And then the last piece slid into place, cold and complete. Edward Cole had a son. A boy who'd been maybe 7 when they took his father away in chains. A boy who'd grown up in the shadow of a lie, carrying a name and a wound, and a patience that could wait decades. I knew that boy. Grown now. I knew exactly whose table he sat down at every Sunday, whose bread he'd broken, whose daughter he'd married. Mine. By the time the lake turned gray with dawn, I understood the truth. They hadn't married into my family for my money. They'd married in to collect a debt I'd forgotten I owed. I sat on the dock with the cold soaking through my coat, and I let the memory rise the way a body rises in still water. 30 years ago, a killing in a rail yard town north of here. A man named Edward Cole, a night foreman with grease under his nails, and a kid at home arrested for a murder he never committed. I was young, then hungry, an investigator who wanted a conviction more than he wanted the facts. I found a thread of doubt, a witness who put Edward across town, and I buried it. I told myself it was clutter. I told myself the case was already clean. It wasn't clutter. It was a man's whole life. Vince came down the slope behind me, 2 mugs steaming in his hands. He'd been my partner long enough to read my silences, and he didn't waste words filling this one. He just handed me the coffee and lowered himself onto the boards with a groan. You've got that look, he said. The one that means you already know and you're just deciding how much it's going to cost to say it out loud. I wrapped both hands around the mug. Trevor's last name isn't the one on his marriage license. Not really. He's a Cole. Vince went still. Cole, as in Edward Cole. The warehouse. The one I told you about years back after too much bourbon. I made myself look at him. Trevor is his son. The boy who was 7 years old when they took his father away in front of him. The wind pushed a low chop against the pilings. Vince set his coffee down like it had gone bitter. He watched his father rot in a cell because of me, I said. The words tasted like rust. Edward died inside. Pneumonia, the file says. But that's just the word they use when a man stops trying to live. Trevor grew up on that. He grew up learning exactly two names: the man who buried the doubt and the man who signed the sentence. You, Vince said quietly. And Vaughn. Me and Vaughn. I nodded. Judge Curtis Vaughn, young prosecutor back then, ambitious as a blade, the one who'd taken my clean case and made his career on it. He'd known there were questions. We both had. And when Edward's appeal came years later, it was Vaughn who made the paperwork disappear. Vaughn who kept the lie sealed because the truth would have salted both our reputations at once. We were bound together by the same shallow grave. So the marriage, Vince said slowly, working it the way he worked every knot. Sabrina, that wasn't love. That was a long game. It was a debt collection. I stared out at the water going silver. Trevor didn't stumble into my daughter at some gallery opening. He studied me. He learned my family, my church pew, my Sunday table. He found the softest way into my life and walked through it smiling. The money, the inheritance, being named heir to everything I built, that's real, but that's not the root. That's the timing. The root is a boy who promised a dying man he'd make it hurt. That still doesn't excuse what he's doing to Sabrina, Vince said, an edge coming up in his voice. She's a person, Ray, not a debt line. Whatever you did, she didn't do it. No, but it explains why he'll never stop. The money was just the timing. I heard how tired I sounded, how old. Revenge is the engine. The fortune is only the fuse he chose to light, because it burns clean and legal. And Vaughn's back in it now, not for the inheritance. He doesn't care about my accounts. He's in it to erase me. I'm the last living man who can open that warehouse file and prove what we did. Trevor wants my life. Vaughn just wants my silence permanent. For a while, neither of us spoke. A loon called somewhere across the lake, that lonely broken sound, and I thought about how a single cowardice could travel 30 years and come back wearing a wedding ring. So what do we do, Ray? Vince asked. I'd been circling that question all night, and every road out of it led through the same door, a door I'd spent my whole career pretending wasn't there. We tell the truth, all of it, even the part that damns me. I turned to face him fully so he'd know I meant it. I reopen Edward Cole's case myself. I sign an affidavit. I name what I buried and why. It clears an innocent man's memory. It exposes Vaughn, and yes, it ends me. Disbarment's the gentle version. There's no way to unmake Trevor's motive without confessing I was the one who gave it to him. Vince searched my face for the flinch, the escape clause, the lawyer's hedge. He didn't find one. You're talking about torching everything you have, he said. Your name, your pension, the version of you people put on Christmas cards. The version on the Christmas cards is a lie a man told to sleep at night. My voice didn't shake, and that surprised me. I was Edward's victim's maker. I was Trevor's too. I made the wound he spent his life sharpening. Victim and cause, same man, same hands. I can't be the second one anymore. For the first time in 30 years, something in my chest loosened like a held breath, finally let go over cold water. Then my phone buzzed against the dock, hard, insistent, the sound of a trap springing shut. A single line from my attorney glowed up at me in the gray light. Trevor just filed for emergency temporary guardianship. Hearings in 3 days. It's docketed in Vaughn's courtroom. An emergency petition gave me only days to prove I was sane to a system already rigged to prove I wasn't. By sunrise, I was at Adrian's office downtown, the smell of burnt coffee and toner sharp in the recycled air. Adrian Blackwood had been my attorney for 11 years, the kind of litigator who read fine print like other people read weather reports. She spread the filing across her desk and tapped Trevor's name at the bottom. Here's the thing they're counting on, she said. Trevor petitioned for emergency temporary guardianship. That's a court order that would strip your legal right to make decisions about your money, your medical care, everything, and hand it to him supposedly to protect you. And he steered it into Judge Vaughn's courtroom because Vaughn owes him. So we ask for a different judge. We could. But recusal motions are slow, and slow is what kills us. She leaned back. We don't argue in his courtroom. We end his courtroom. I didn't understand yet. She explained it the way you explain a bridge to someone afraid of heights. A guardianship hearing was one battlefield, and Vaughn controlled it. But a judge who took favors to rig a case answered to something bigger, the Judicial Conduct Commission, the state body that investigates and disciplines judges, and the district attorney who prosecutes crimes. If we filed there with proof, Vaughn wouldn't be refereeing the fight anymore. He'd be in one of his own. We route around him, Adrienne said. 2 packages. One to the commission, one to the DA. Same evidence, different doors. We built it for 36 hours straight. Vince came in that first night, laptop under his arm, hoodie zipped to his chin. Vince Marchetti did forensic audio for insurance firms, and occasionally for people like me who needed a recording to survive cross-examination. He plugged in a drive and pulled up the waveform of Trevor's voice admitting exactly what he'd done. The recordings are authenticated, Vince said, dragging the cursor across a spike. Metadata's in intact, timestamps line up, no splice artifacts. But I'll be honest with you, Ray, the recordings are authenticated, but the toxicology and the money are what win this. A judge can question a tape. He can't question your blood panel or a bank transfer. I was right, and the truth of it settled in my stomach like a stone. Someone had been dosing me small amounts, enough to make me forgetful, unsteady, the picture of a man who couldn't manage his own life. The lab report proved it. The wire transfers proved who paid for it. Lorraine handled the last door. Lorraine Petrakis managed my accounts and had watched over them since my late wife's time. By noon, she'd frozen every asset Trevor could reach and flagged the trust so nothing could move without 2 signatures. He can't touch a dime now, she told me over the phone, her voice flat with satisfaction. If he tries, the bank calls me and I call the DA. Everything had to detonate at once, the right channels, the right law, no shortcuts a defense lawyer could exploit. But there was one piece I'd been circling for 2 days, afraid to touch. Rachel. I met her at a diner off the interstate, vinyl booths and a jukebox nobody fed anymore. Rachel Ames was 34, with my own stubborn jaw and eyes that measured me before I sat down. She was the daughter I'd never known existed. A child, given up a record, buried a truth someone in my family had paid to erase decades ago. Meeting her wasn't strategy. It was the one thing in all of this I couldn't stomach turning into a weapon. So I told her everything plainly. Trevor, the petition, the judge, what her existence meant. She wrapped both hands around a coffee mug and studied the steam. If I come forward, it blows their whole plan apart, doesn't it? It does. I made myself hold her gaze. But I won't ask you to do it for me. Only if you choose to. Because that was the truth of the leverage. Trevor's entire case rested on painting me as a confused old man with no rightful heirs to protect. A hidden legitimate heir. A daughter whose birth had been concealed, whose bloodline could be confirmed by a simple DNA test, didn't just complicate his story. It detonated it. If Rachel was real and documented, then the estate wasn't Trevor's to seize, and the concealment itself was evidence of exactly the kind of fraud the DA prosecutes. She was quiet a long time. Cars hissed past on the wet highway. You could have used this without ever telling me, she said finally. Filed the paperwork. Let me find out from a lawyer. I know. Then I choose to. Her chin came up. Nobody buries the truth twice in this family. We drove straight to Adrienne's office. Rachel read the affidavit twice, asked what each paragraph obligated her to, and only then uncapped the pen. She signed her sworn statement, declaring who she was and how she'd learned it. Then she pressed a cotton swab to the inside of her cheek, sealed it in the evidence envelope Vince held open, and initialed the chain of custody form so no one could ever claim the sample had been tampered with. The envelope sat on the desk between us, small and white and heavier than anything I'd carried in 30 years. "That's it," Adrienne said softly. "That's the whole case rewritten." For a moment, I let myself believe we might actually beat them. Then my phone lit up on the desk. Not my attorney. Not Lorraine. A number I'd know until the day I died. "Sabrina." I answered without breathing. Her voice came through thin and shaking, stripped of every cold thing I remembered in it. "Ray, please. I need to see you tonight. Just you, no lawyers, no one else." A ragged pause. "There's something about Trevor you have to hear before that hearing. Alone. Tonight. Before I reveal the shocking truth and step into the final showdown, who do you think will fall first? Leave a 1 in the comments if you believe justice will prevail, or a 0 if you think the villains will slip away, so I know you're still here with me. Also, please note the following part of the story contains some fictional elements added for dramatic effect. If this isn't your style, feel free to exit the video here. The night before the hearing, in a booth at the back of an empty diner, I had rehearsed how to expose my daughter, not how to save her. I had the folder ready. I had the timeline, the bank records, the phone logs. I had spent months building the case that would prove Sabrina had helped Trevor push me toward a courtroom, where a judge would decide whether I was competent to run my own life. Trevor, the smooth son-in-law who'd married into this family 4 years back, the man who called me Pop and poured my drinks a little too eagerly. I walked in prepared to win against her. I was not prepared for how small she looked in that vinyl seat. She'd chosen the diner herself, a chrome and neon place off the interstate that had outlasted every fad since I was young. Mia, my granddaughter, the only innocent soul left in this mess, waited 2 booths down with a glass of milk. She wasn't drinking close enough to see me far enough to give us the room this needed. "You came," Sabrina said. "You asked." Her hands were shaking around a napkin she'd shredded into confetti. When she finally looked up, her mascara had already surrendered. "Dad, if you were really sick, I had to protect you." Her voice cracked on the last word. "That's what he told me. That's what I saw. You forgot my birthday. You left the stove on. You called me by Mom's name twice in 1 week. I never called you your mother's name. You did. I heard it." She pressed the heels of her palms against her eyes. "That's the part that broke me. I wasn't lying to that lawyer. I believed it. I watched you slip, and I signed those papers because I thought I was catching you before you fell. I understood then what I hadn't let myself see. She hadn't betrayed me with a smile. She'd been shown a father coming apart at the seams, and she'd never once suspected that the seams were being cut by someone else's hand, that the confusion, the tremors, the fog had come from something slipped into the coffee Trevor was always so happy to bring me. I could have told her she was a fool. I could have laid the whole scheme out like a prosecutor and let her drown in it. Instead, I reached into the folder and slid one photograph across the sticky table. "Look at the photo, Sabrina, then tell me who needed protecting." She stared at it. A backyard somewhere in a state neither of us had ever lived in. A woman with 2 small children on a porch swing, and Trevor laughing his arm around the woman like he'd never worn a wedding ring in our family at all. Who are these people? His other wife. His other children. You were the mark, sweetheart, not the partner. I kept my voice gentle because that was the only thing I had left to give her. He didn't marry into this family for you. He married into it for the company, the accounts, the power of attorney. He'd get the day a judge declared me unfit. You were the door. He just needed you to hold it open. The napkin confetti fell from her hands. She made a sound I hadn't heard since she was 6 years old and had come off her bicycle in the driveway, palms scraped raw, more frightened than hurt. Oh God, what did I let them do to you? I remembered that driveway. I remembered running the length of it, beside her wobbling wheels, my hand hovering at the small of her back, letting go 1 inch at a time so she wouldn't feel me let go. I've got you, I'd said. I've always got you. I had promised her then that I would never let her fall alone, and I realized the promise still stood even now, even here. I did not feel triumphant. There is no victory in watching your child understand she has been used against the one person who would have burned the world down for her. A detective would have savored the confession. A father only wanted the crying to stop. Come here, I said, and she came around the table and folded into me the way she had when she was small, and I held my daughter in a diner booth while the fry cook pretended not to watch, and Mia turned her face politely to the window. I let him convince me, she whispered into my shoulder. The stumbling, the memory. I saw it with my own eyes. You saw exactly what he built for you to see. That's how the good ones work. They don't argue with your eyes. They feed them. She pulled back, wiped her face with the flat of her hand, and something in her jaw reset the same stubborn set her mother used to get. The hearing's in 9 hours, she said. I know. They think I'm still theirs. Trevor thinks I'm testifying for him tomorrow. He does. She looked at the photograph one last time, then at me, and the fear went out of her eyes and left something harder in its place. Tell me what you need me to do, I told her. Mia slid into the booth with a legal pad, and for the next hour, the three of us built the thing Trevor had never once imagined possible. A daughter turned witness, a father turned believer again, a case that no longer pointed at the wrong person. Morning came gray and certain over Judge Vaughn's courtroom. Trevor strolled in, first chin-high, tie perfect, already tasting the ruling. The bailiff called us to order, and Vaughn settled into the bench. Then the doors opened behind them, and I walked in carrying the briefcase Trevor had been so careful, so very careful never to let me bring. They had built an emergency hearing to erase me quietly. That morning I walked into it with a briefcase loud enough to end all of them. The briefcase was leather scuffed at the corners, and heavier than it looked. Inside it wasn't money or bonds. It was evidence the kind that doesn't blink. Trevor sat at the petitioner's table, my former son-in-law, the man who had spent 2 years convincing a courtroom I was too frail to manage my own affairs. Beside him, his attorney shuffled papers, as if the ruling were already printed. At my table stood Adrienne, my counsel. A woman who read statutes the way other people read scripture. She had warned me the night before that guardianship hearings move fast. A judge can strip a person's legal control over their own life and estate in minutes, appointing someone else to sign every check and consent to every treatment. That someone was meant to be Trevor. Judge Vaughn cleared his throat. We are here on an emergency petition for temporary guardianship over Raymond Kessler. Given the medical filings, I'm inclined to grant temporary authority to the petitioner pending. Your Honor, before you rule this hearing, has guests you didn't invite. Adrienne stepped forward. Behind me, 2 people rose from the gallery. One was a compact man in a charcoal suit, a badge clipped to his belt, an investigator from the district attorney's office. The other was a silver-haired woman holding a leather folio, a representative from the State Judicial Conduct Commission, the body that reviews complaints of misconduct against judges. Both had been notified in advance through proper channels, and their presence was entirely lawful. Vaughn's jaw tightened. This is my courtroom counselor. Not for very much longer, Judge Vaughn, Adrienne said, and set a single sheet on the bench. The commission has opened a review into your relationship with the petitioner's holding company. You should have recused yourself. You didn't. The color drained from his face like water from a cracked glass. Trevor twisted toward me, still wearing that easy smile he used like a weapon. "You've got nothing, old man." I opened the briefcase. "I've got your other wife, a tampered pill bottle, and a case from 1993. Shall we begin there?" I let it land. Then I did what Adrienne had coached me to do. I explained plainly so no one in that room could pretend to be confused. "This," I said, lifting a lab report, "is a toxicology analysis. My daily medication was tested by an independent laboratory. It found a sedative that was never prescribed to me added to my pills. That is why I seemed confused in the filings Trevor submitted. I wasn't declining. I was being drugged." Adrienne handed the report to the DA's investigator, not to the judge. "Chain of custody matters," she'd said, "and evidence goes to the authority empowered to act on it. This," I continued, "is a set of bank records. Money moved from my accounts into a shell company Trevor controls. Guardianship would have made that theft permanent and legal." Sabrina rose next. "My daughter, the one Trevor had fooled into believing I was failing." Sworn in, she testified in a steady voice that Trevor had handed her the capsules to slip into my organizer, swearing they were my heart medication, and that she had kept every written instruction he'd ever given her. Trevor's smile finally cracked. Then the doors opened again, and Rachel walked in. I should explain who she is, because until that morning, almost no one knew. Rachel is my daughter, born before my marriage, quietly supported for decades, never named in any public record. Trevor's entire petition rested on the claim that he was protecting the family estate for the only rightful heir, his late wife's line. Rachel's existence documented by a birth certificate and a paternity result. Adrienne now produced meant that premise was false at its foundation. There was another heir. He'd built his case on a lie about the family itself. Vince, my old partner from the force, stood to confirm the second marriage. He'd found the certificate. Trevor had a wife in another state, married while still legally wed to my daughter. Bigamy. The DA's investigator wrote it down without expression. "And this," Adrienne said, sliding a laptop onto the rail, "is a recording. Mia, Trevor's stepdaughter, my granddaughter, filmed it herself." Mia's voice filled the courtroom, clear and young and unafraid, describing what she'd seen the man in her house do. I had told her the truth only days earlier, and instead of breaking, she had turned witness. A child who chose the truth over the man who'd helped raise her. It was the bravest thing I'd seen in years. The investigator stood. He crossed the well of the courtroom and took the files from Adrienne's hands one by one into official custody: the toxicology report, the bank records, the marriage certificate, the recording. Each document passed to the exact authority with the power to use it. The commission's representative received her own copy of the recusal evidence. Vaughn gripped the edge of the bench as if the room had tilted. The machine they had assembled to bury me had swung on its hinges and turned to face its own builders. The very hearing designed to silence me had become the record that would convict them. Trevor said nothing now. There was nothing left in him to say. I closed the briefcase. My hands were steady. For the first time in 2 years, I felt the floor solid beneath me, and yet standing in that vindicated silence, I felt the weight of one file I had not handed to anyone. It sat at the bottom of the case, older than the rest, its edges soft with age. 1993. A truth about me, not Trevor, not Vaughn, on the single thing that could still bring me down. Justice that dodges its own author isn't justice at all. So I drew a breath, stepped toward the investigator, and opened my mouth to say the one thing no one had come here expecting to hear. Looking back, I handed the old 1993 file to the investigator, confessing my own sins. Standing before God, I realized true justice requires absolute truth, not self-preservation. Don't be like me, never let ambition bury your integrity, because a lie left to rot will only poison the ones you love. I believe that true peace can never be built on hidden secrets, and no amount of family revenge can undo the past. When hatred drives a cycle of family revenge, everyone burns. Ultimately, this endless family revenge solves nothing. The painful sting of family betrayal almost destroyed my home, yet giving in to bitterness only deepens the wound. I saw firsthand how family betrayal blinds people to love and how family betrayal tears generations apart. Justice isn't about payback. It's about taking accountability before it is too late. If this story resonated with you, please leave your thoughts in the comments below, share this video, and subscribe to the channel for more meaningful journeys. Thank you so much for watching until the end. A quick note for our viewers. Upcoming stories contain fictionalized elements crafted for educational purposes. If you prefer a different kind of content, please feel free to exit and choose a topic better suited to your taste.